Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for coming along today. I'm David Campbell Bannerman. I'm chairman of the Freedom Association and delighted to be so. And thank you for, this is a very important conference, I think, because it's the first ever cancel culture specific conference. And this is becoming, as well we know, thanks for your interest in it, it's becoming a major issue, cancel culture, and we'll be looking into it in more depth today, and we'll then move on to how we push back against it and talk about that. So we've got a fantastic lineup. As I say, we've got an additional surprise guest who's a good guy, a very interesting guy, who will be turning up at 11:15 for that session. But just to start with a few words about the Freedom Association itself. Many of you will be members, many will not, but please think of signing up. tfa.net is the website. And the Patrons Club, 2 big events a year we do. A lot of people like to do that, support us that way. We're not right-wing. We're not left-wing, and we're not even centre-wing as an organisation. We are wingless, and I think it's important to reiterate that because freedom should not just belong to the right wing. And we have had on the Labour side, for example, we had the wonderful Lord Stoddart, who's a brilliant speaker. Sadly, he's passed on to greater things. But we have Brendan Chilton, who was Vote Leave, Labour Vote Leave, worked very closely with Kate Hoey, who's very interested in this, Kate Hoey. So we do have Labour representatives and members, and Lib Dems. Well, we have the wonderful Lembit. I'm going to introduce it a bit. Occasionally associated with Lib Dems. and we do have a Lib Dem councillor, I believe, as well, and around the country. Obviously Conservatives as well. But on reform, we have the President, the Honorary President of Reform speaking later, Nigel Farage, and we have Reform people here, and we have UKIP and others, Reclaim, etc. So we are genuinely apolitical, and it's very important to say that because it's very easy to just pigeonhole us as being right-wing and, not to listen to the wider messages that apply to all of us, for heaven's sake. You've actually got our 10 principles are here of the Freedom Society, and again, I point at these and say, how many of these are controversial, particularly? I mean, individual freedom, I think that's pretty good, isn't it? Personal and family responsibility. The rule of law, which has been stretched just recently, as I think we all know. Limited government, free market economy, national parliamentary democracy, and there's a few issues there I think we also know about. Strong national defence, and a free press and other media. Now, those were the 8 points we used to have. We had to add 2. Quite recently, just over a year ago, freedom of religion and belief we had to add. And actually, it's in this fine Emmanuel Centre venue, I think that's very relevant with the light pouring in there. But that, again, has become very relevant. And we used to regard these things as being, just taken as given. But now they become under threat, particularly freedom of speech, and the last one is freedom of speech, expression, and assembly. Well, cancel culture is all about freedom of speech. And again, we used to take this for granted, and we can no longer do so. And I find that very scary, having studied politics in the 70s, 80s, that we are in such a position. So cancel culture, what is it? I mean, some call it shunning, which is a very old word. It's almost medieval or even older. Being ostracized, banished, like in sort of some of these wonderful Shakespearean plays. But I think with social media, it's become instant. It's become, people being instantly condemned and banished and sent to the outer darkness. And again, reiterating the point that it's not about the right wing. It's, J.K. Rowling, who's a well-known Labour supporter, Germaine Greer, who's not known for her right-wing affiliations. We've taken a long time to organise this, and all credit to Andrew Allison for putting it together, and Tim for funding it, Tim Scott, the Treasurer, for funding it. But we couldn't keep up with all those being cancelled. And even just a few days ago, we've had the famous gardener who was on GB News saying that he's terrified. He's in his 70s, and it's Alan Titmarsh, and it's like he's saying, he's had this long TV career, and now he's terrified, and he may actually retire because of cancel culture. So it's hard to keep up with all the threats that cancel culture brings to us. And this is why I think this conference is so timely and so important. And clearly people are feeling the pressure of being fired from their jobs, expelled, shamed, humiliated, or driven from society by this cancel culture. So it is ominous. President Trump has called it totalitarian. But then, fun enough, President Obama agrees with Trump in the sense of saying that, in his words, people who do really good stuff have flaws. And, it's not right to attack them through cancel culture. Those are President Obama's words. So, this is a clear and present danger. And I hope today we can look at it in more detail and actually see how we're going to tackle this. So I'm going to introduce Lembit Opik, who is great fun, actually. Great. I've always enjoyed his company, and I'm related to a Liberal Prime Minister, but that's very irrelevant. But as you know, he's now a radio presenter, and as a Lib Dem MP, he represented a part of Wales. And he's always been very good on free speech, and I'm delighted to say he'll be joining the Freedom Association Council. So, as I say, we're again showing that we are apolitical. So I'm delighted. He's going to say a few words about the craziness of it. But just before he does so, there is a message from Priti Patel, who's very supportive of the Freedom Association, and I'll just read part of that. We'll put the full statement on the website, but she says, Priti, our freedoms are under attack, and it is our duty to defend them. Freedom of speech, freedom of expression, freedom to think, and freedom to hold religious beliefs are being threatened by the insidious advance of cancel culture throughout our institutions. The arts, media, the BBC, charities like the National Trust, do back Restore Trust, by the way, the civil service, businesses, the public sector, and our schools are now at the front line of a battle that is raging, where the views of the liberal establishment and some campaign groups are corrosively oppressing freedom and defying common sense. Those institutions have become infested with people with woke ideal and a culture of groupthink, where dissenting voices are silenced and cancelled. This began under New Labour, but has continued to grow, and the impacts on our country and society are disturbing. And she finishes by saying, we've already lost ground to cancel culture, but we must fight back and not back down. We should call out cancel culture where we see it and challenge those who seek to spread bias and contested views as fact. We should reach out and protect those who face being cancelled. And we need to make the case for reform of our institutions so they cannot fall under the grip of one narrow world viewpoint. If we do not fight back and defend our values, then our freedoms will be lost and our democracy weakened. I think we could agree with a lot of that. Thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, I hand over to Lembit.
Thanks very much indeed for upstaging me with your liberal credentials. My name's Lembit Opik, which, by the way, it turns out to be an anagram of the phrase, I like to be MP. What are the odds? Yeah. And I killed a BPM, but that line's been cancelled now. David said something I didn't agree with. He said that you're wingless, I think freedom association is like Red Bull. You give freedom wings. And that's why I've agreed to get involved in an active way. And I'll explain why in a minute. A little bit about me first. I was born in Northern Ireland to Estonian parents. I said to my parents, why did you go from Estonia to Northern Ireland? And they said something like, well, we wanted you to suffer as much as we did, Lembit. It kind of worked. Went to Bristol University, and I started my main political career in Newcastle upon Tyne, where I became a councillor. And I recognised even then how influenced people can be by convention. Lembit Opik isn't a very typical name. I'm the only person on earth with that actual name. And there was a woman when I was canvassing in 1992 who came to the door, and we put tons of leaflets out. Back then, when the Lib Dems were still a political party, we did that sort of thing very well. And she came to the door, this really happened, said, who's the Labour candidate, Lembit? I went, oh, it's a woman called Hilary Franks. She literally said this next thing, Hilary Franks? That's a strange name, Lembit. Is she foreign? And I said, and she's not actually. And she says, well, I'll be voting for you. What we need is a local lad, not one of these foreigners come here to take our jobs. Which indicates the first lesson here. People are comfortable with that which they find familiar. And the leaflets had made my name familiar to her. Then I went into Parliament in Wales, and I was helped by the fact I was born in Bangor, Northern Ireland. I didn't tell them that part. And I became leader of the Welsh Liberal Democrats. I spent 13 years as an MP. I went out with a cheeky girl, and then I lost. The press were unkind about that relationship. They suggested that I went out with both of the cheeky girls. But I don't know, they're twins. Then I drifted around for a while and started doing talks and ships and so on, and lost my way, in a sense. And I had a very dark few years because I didn't feel I had a political home anywhere. And slowly I listened to my soul, and my soul said that I needed to go back to what I originally got involved in politics to do, and that is to defend freedom of speech. There's a very serious reason for that. Members of my family were exterminated by the Soviet system, which didn't tolerate any kind of dissent. And I was actively involved in the freedom movement, the freedom association, if you like, for Estonia, and got into some trouble with the KGB. It was a frightening time, but it was all about liberating a nation. And for me, the core principle why I overcame an inherent shyness was because I felt there was a bigger motivation. I had a duty to right wrongs which I'd grown up with and which has created a melancholy for many generations in my life. We got independence for Estonia, and I'm very proud to be a dual citizen of Britain and Estonia. Probably the only real negative about the collapse of the Soviet Union was the extended length of the Eurovision Song Contest. Then I went into broadcasting and authorship, and that's what I largely do now. I do some public affairs work, but my passion is what brings you into this room. It's about unlocking doors which authoritarian, small-minded, self-seeking politicians seek to lock. People who haven't got the courage to defend their position, but instead prefer to cancel you, lest you convince the majority of your rightness. I loathe that kind of thinking. So the second thing I'll say is that as I look through the list, and I'll go through that in a moment, the Freedom Association exists to unlock doors for anybody with something to say, not just everybody who agrees with you. Elon Musk is a mercurial character, but he himself has said that free speech isn't about giving a platform to the people you agree with and the people you like. It's about giving the platform to people who you disagree with and you may not like. And in my broadcasting career, I try to do that. I now work on TNT Radio, which I really do think is the home of free speech, unlike the legacy and the old stations and some new stations which pretend to be enlightened but nevertheless cancel people. And you probably know the stations I mean. When I broadcast, I open the doors to people regardless of their position because the public is smart enough to make their own decisions. I can have people who I find offensive, stupid even, irrational, irreverent, and sometimes just plain annoying. In fact, I had Andrew Allison on this morning. No offense. Where are you? No offense, mate. He's about to do a stage. He's going to cover me in glitter in a minute, isn't he? So on this point, the media, moving on to the next thing I want to say, is in a very poor state. It's actually wounded and it's conforming. David Campbell Bannerman mentioned the BBC. I worked there for 7 years. I was told not to challenge the climate emergency. Someone came onto my show, BBC Radio Kent, and told me about the danger of polar bears going extinct. When I said to her, "You are aware that the polar bear population is at a record level since 1962, I got training. You shouldn't have said that, Lembit. I said, but it was a factual inaccuracy. And frankly, although I won't go down this path too much now, the concept that our 3.5% contribution to a trace gas, which is 0.04% of the atmosphere, that is wrecking our climate, is idiotic, absolutely idiotic. And if you believe that kind of rubbish, you'd probably worship at the altar of a 16-year-old Swedish schoolgirl. And I was told not to say that on the BBC. The BBC, which is funded by you. This is the... Here they are, officer. The reality is that we're paying for misinformation bias and cancellation. Cancellation, in this case, or an entire idea to be replaced by the useful idiots in Parliament and elsewhere with an economic strategy which is guaranteed to hand the keys of our economies to the countries smart enough to realize that human-generated CO2 is not our enemy, but CO2 is our friend. I salute Russia, India, China, and all of those other countries who are fooling the useful idiots in Western politics in giving trillions of pounds away and then buying back the products that they've made, producing even more CO2 than we did, and feeling that we've done a good thing. All of that is the consequence of a cancel culture where people like me and people like you are not allowed to speak the truth, or at least the truth as we see it. The number of times I've gone onto a program explaining my views on the environment, which I've been studying climatology for 45 years, saying if somebody else on the other side has a better argument, let them come on here. Don't cancel them, bring them on. But no one will do it. Because, third point, cancel culture is a cynical attempt to get your idea across, even if it is worse than the other person's. It is like a parent shouting down a child just to exercise control instead of listening to what the child has to say. And my feeling, therefore, is the freedom of association is absolutely central in unlocking our liberty, and that's by taking on the legacy, the old, if you like, the out-of-date media. It's actually, incidentally, is why I work at TNT Radio now. Looking at the agenda, then, we've got so much to look forward to. How to win the culture wars. It is actually a war, not because we want to fight, but because they're making it into a fight. I prefer to debate rather than fight. But if they want to fight, let's bring it on. Because we've got the most powerful weapon of all, which is the confidence of our arguments. How woke are our universities? Nick Clegg, arguably the worst leader of the Liberal Democrats in its history. Why did Nick Clegg cross the road? Because he promised not to. Some would say Nick Clegg supported David Cameron's proposal to abolish non-violent extremists from having platforms at university. Non-violent extremists. So, if you're not violent, who defines the extremist? This was a man in charge of the Liberal Democrats. There's a clue in the name. And when the Deputy Prime Minister colludes with the Prime Minister to silence what they consider to be extremism, you know this country is in a bad state. So I'm looking forward to seeing that. You'll hear my views about the limits of free speech later, so I won't go into that now. Disinvestation. You get punished financially if you don't follow the line. You get disinvested if you don't support the climate emergency. It's a wonderful weapon to shut us up and to cancel people by economic default. Looking at parliamentarians and what they can do to conquer culture, I can tell you from personal experience, this is difficult. I had Andrew Bridge, an MP, on my show this morning. He's been cancelled because he doesn't go along with the zeitgeist. He had the audacity to suggest that maybe there were a few things wrong with the COVID lockdown. Some people may agree with him. People who have parties in Downing Street, for example, who didn't follow their own advice. People on the BBC who are telling us every day that we should lock down have no intention of doing it themselves. The hypocrisy is my fourth point, and I'm looking forward to seeing what's said about that there. Nigel Farage is always good value. They tried to silence him. You were told you were stupid if you supported Brexit, and the public reacted. I said, stupid or not, we're not listening to you anymore, because David Cameron, I don't think World War III was going to start when we leave Brexit. You're just going to lose your job, mate. And that's what actually happened. And I know how that feels. And finally, to have David Starkey on cancel culture, that's going to be a treat, I think, for us all. What can we do? Well, we can identify the gatekeepers. The gatekeepers to cancellation are woke, censorship, lack of confidence, self-interest, and the party political system that puts itself above the public. What is the solution to that? My suggestion is it's in this room. My personal judgment, I'm 58, and I'd like to think I've got a few more years in me, but my personal judgment is to commit myself to working with the Freedom Association puts us in a commanding position for two reasons. We're right, and we've got the arguments to prove it. The public accepts a certain amount of being pushed around, but when you push them too far, when you take their petrol and diesel cars away, when you make the poor unable to afford to drive into central London, when you tell people to shut up because they think that they had a COVID injury, as I did, that's when the public say that's enough now. And my feeling is, ladies and gentlemen, that what we're doing today is setting out an agenda in the run-up to the next general election that they cannot ignore. Because millions of people, if given the confidence, will agree with what we're saying here. I'm very honoured that Andrew asked me to be involved in the Freedom Association, and I gladly accept that because it's really coming home, and I feel more comfortable doing this even than I did as an MP. And if anyone says, why do you get involved with some crazy association that thinks we can get freedom back, it's because the doors are being locked by authoritarians, and the Freedom Association holds the key. Thank you.